I might start by saying that in some presentations that I've said that Joe Biden will go down in history as the America's answer to Clement Attlee, and I've discovered with great interest that nobody remembers. I'm not just saying that because nobody remembers who Clement Attlee is. Clement Attlee was the guy, the British Prime Minister after World War II. He was the guy directly after Winston Spencer Churchill who introduced the welfare state to Britain. He introduced the National Health Service, which is still there, and a large administrative bureaucracy, which is also still there in the UK. Americans never did that up until now. And what's really interesting about the way the stimulus bill has just been passed through the House of Representatives and the Senate and has now been signed into law by Biden, is that when, after it was signed, it starts to be referred to in a different way. Previously, before it was signed the COVID-19 rescue bill. And now it's referred to as the American Rescue Bill. Because I said at the time, a couple of weeks ago, that when you actually looked at what was in the bill, there was of the $1.9 trillion, there was only about $400 billion of what we would call COVID spending in it. In addition to that, there was about $400 billion of income support. And apart from that, it was entirely programs which supported Democratic Party constituencies. And it's that second part which is now getting the emphasis in media discussion in the US. And it's now referred to as the American Rescue Bill. And there's been a number of articles about this in the US press, and the simplest and most precise I could find was one in the New York Times, which is often regarded as one of the voices for the Democratic Party, by Jamil Boole. And Jamil Boole used to be the chief political writer for a website called Slate. He's working for the New York Times now as a political writer, and he talks about, and this is a simplified version of what he says, he talks about the American Rescue Bill in this way. He says, in addition to hundreds of billions of dollars in direct payments to most American families, the American Rescue Bill, as it's now called, extends federal unemployment benefits and makes the first $10,200 of those benefits non-taxable for households with incomes up to $150,000 a year. That means that American families up to 200,000 Australian dollars a year are now getting welfare, and that's what we call middle-class welfare in Australia. I've never seen this in the US before. It includes an extra $7.25 billion in small business loans, $25 billion in food and drinking establishments, and more than $50 billion in transport funding, including billions in transit, $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, housing assistance, and also billions of dollars for personal protective equipment, and they're actually spending something on COVID-19 but vaccines. But he says, if Biden were just signing a bill to assess the public to end the pandemic, this would be a substantial accomplishment. But there is much more in this package than just relief. It also allocates hundreds of billions of dollars in sweeping reforms to the social security net. On top of the list is a major, if temporary, expansion of the child tax credit. Well, it's temporary until they make it permanent in the year ahead. Instead of a $2,000 credit, parents will receive an annual payment of up to $3,600 for a child 5 or younger, and up to $3,000 for those ages 6 to 17. Families with no taxable income will still be able to claim the full benefit, all but the highest income families, those who are making more than 200,000 Australian dollars a year, will receive something from the government. This change alone would slash child poverty by an estimated 40%. So here we see where this legislation is actually going. But this change isn't alone. The American Rescue Plan also triples the value of the earned income tax credit for low-income earners without children, providing a benefit of $1,500 for more than 17 million Americans, and fixing the tax code that as it stands punishes the childless in low-wage jobs. Biden's relief plan also includes a major expansion of the Affordable Care Act, which is what we call Obamacare, in the form of greater subsidies for Americans who purchase their health insurance in marketplaces established by the law. This would also reduce the number of uninsured people by more than 4 million. So in addition, this is a major expansion of publicly funded healthcare in the US to the largest state that has ever been provided. The list of new policies goes on, he says. There is money in the American Rescue Plan to expand food stamps, bolster state welfare programs, and increase federal support for child and dependent care. Put this all together, and the bill is expected to reduce overall poverty by more than a third and child poverty by more than half. With no exaggeration, this is the single most important piece of anti-poverty, by which we would say welfare, legislation since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, which was way back in the 1960s, by the way. Indeed, the story of this bill may be the story of how Biden repudiated the austerity politics of much of the last decade. The American Rescue Plan is only a start because the administration was limited by the budget reconciliation process. Many of its provisions need to be made permanent, there is a lot of work still for the Biden administration and Democratic majorities that exist now in Congress, much of it tied to whether a Senate can be passed by majority rule. That being said, we should acknowledge that the bill is, as Biden said of Obamacare, a very big deal for the country. And so what we have here is the beginning in the US of a welfare state. The problem is how you pay for that. Now, back in November, when I talked about the economic programs of both sides of politics, I pointed out that the way they were going to pay for it was by increasing taxes on investment, increasing not just corporate tax, but also capital gains tax and other taxes, take away tax benefits that were being provided to hedge funds. So they're taxing the whole investment area. And really interestingly, that's what Clement Attlee did. And when Clement Attlee did that, he did things like he increased the tax on, he said that he so disliked investment, he called it unearned income, and he increased the tax on unearned income to 95%, 19 shillings in the pound, so 95 cents on the dollar. And the problem about taxing investment, is it generated low investment and low growth in the British economy for the next generation. So that's the problem here. Our problem is not what happens for the next 20 years. Our problem is what happens next year. Because I think the major danger to the stock market boom, is increasing taxes on corporate income, which kills after-tax corporate earnings. Now, Janet Yellen wants to put that off at least until next year. We'll see what happens when they attempt to make this bill permanent.